So during the mid-1900s, people noticed car steering wheels and dashboards were surprisingly hard, especially in cars that were parked abruptly after going fast. Commonly referred to as a crash, this pastime was increasing in popularity, but was frowned upon once they realised lots of people were dying from it. It wasn't until 1952 that a bloke named John Hetrick came up with the idea of the car safety airbag to help catch people's heads in the event of a crash. Unfortunately, the idea didn't really catch on until the 80s, where the concept was further developed. But today, car airbags have saved thousands of lives and are a standard feature on all modern cars. Between the system that recognises the crash and the deployment of various bags within milliseconds, it really is an advanced piece of equipment. But it did get me thinking, could you actually make a complete airbag system from scratch, like if airbags were never invented in the first place? Having a quick look online to see if anyone else had attempted a DIY version, straight away AI was trying to block me. And sitting down to work this out, it's probably right. It's quite a big project. For a complete airbag system, the obvious first thing we'll need is a bag, then some kind of rapid inflation system. We'll need a robust triggering method to detect the crash. Then to test if it works, we'll need a moving test rig and a crash test dummy because my wife has said I'm off crash test duty. All of this, hopefully with existing crap I have in the shed and little to no skill. So the key to any good crash test is obviously a crash test dummy. Our old mate Tubesy should be a good starting point. I thought that was a rat. He has served us well in previous videos, but you may have noticed that he's as rigid as hell, which isn't going to work for us. Compared to him, proper crash test dummies are better at measuring crashes because they behave with more human-like physics. This is because of their weight and mobility, but also apparently because they have a ton of sensors in them. So obviously we need one of these things instead, but having a bit of a look on Marketplace, turns out these things can cost between $100,000 and $1 million each. That's a lot of money for something with only a 240p resolution Voldemort face. So I reckon we're going to have to convert Tubesy. So he has a lot of rotten wood from his decade or so sitting out on a farm, so there's barely anything to even mount limbs to. It must have taken an hour or two, but I managed to recut some shoulder mounts out of some pine. Looking at his old ones, they appear to notch them with some holes and then just use car filler to hold them in place, so we'll just do that. So I had to bog it from the inside, which was pretty easy for the first one, but then for the second one, that took me more time than I care to admit. And then I could reattach his arm plates. Then they should lock right in. But you can see the obvious problem here. His arms don't fold or move around in a human-like way. My plan was to cut some new joints and hinges into his limbs, but I think that's actually going to be more work than just making new ones from scratch. I'm just going to use some old bits of pine. These ones will be for his arms, and these ones will be for his double pine schlong. I cut them all to length, and then I got the bones nice and rounded up on my sander. Then for his hinge joints, I went out and bought some large screws. I picked them up cheap because I forgot to put a hole or slot in the top for a screwdriver. But that works out okay for us because I'm going to weld some chain links on the top. I broke up some sections of chain, then cut them into pairs and welded them on top of the defective screws. I miscounted my arms and ended up with a few too many, but I've heard that chain is great to use on tyres in icy conditions, so I'm going to save them for winter. Now, like how chains help protect you on ice and car airbags help protect you while you drive, a VPN helps protect you while you're browsing online. And that's where today's sponsor comes in, Private Internet Access, a service I've actually been a customer of for 11 years now. Whenever you're online, your device is transmitting a huge amount of information, your IP address, browsing activity, location, and without protection, that data can be visible to internet service providers, network administrators, and hackers. Yeah, those guys. A VPN, or virtual private network, hides your IP address and encrypts your connection through a secure tunnel to help protect you online. It's a bit like a digital airbag. You hope you never need it, but when the shit hits the fan, you're glad it's there. Using their service has been great for me, both at home and whenever I travel and need to use public Wi-Fi, like in a hotel or even a caravan park. It encrypts everything so hackers on the same network can't snoop passwords, keystrokes, or build a profile based on the websites you visit. I also really like to use their service while streaming, especially here in Australia. There are a lot of shows I know are available in other countries that they're trying to hide from me, probably because they hate my accent. I switch on private internet access, pick a US state, and boom, I no longer feel like I'm being left out. They also don't keep any logs of your activity on their servers, and this has actually been independently audited by Deloitte. Plus, you can protect the whole family since they let you use it on an unlimited number of devices at no extra cost. If you're interested in protecting your devices with private internet access, they've given me a special deal to pass on of 83% off plus 4 months free. Go to my link in the description to grab the deal, or you can use the QR code on the screen. There's also a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's completely risk-free. Thanks to Private Internet Access for supporting this video. I marked the centers on the bones, pre-drilled them, and then could attach our knee, hip and elbow joints. That looks pretty good. A nice, simple universal joint for a knee. But I reckon these are also going to be a sick set of nunchucks. I clipped on his new arms, and now he looks a bit like one of those stick death animations. Who remembers them? But otherwise, those proportions seem pretty good so far, and the joints are super mobile. I just kept re-sanding the knee and elbow joints until the flexibility roughly matched an adult who didn't play football when they were young. To make the movement limits a bit more realistic though, I got some nylon strapping out of my strap and Velcro drawer. Yes, this is sadly a place I have. And I stapled them into place. It took ages to get it right, but once I did, I'm pretty happy with that result. Then I also did his ankles. How tight is that Achilles? To hold on the legs, I've made up a set of plywood hips with a bayonet fitting that lumbar punches into his existing plate. I also completed the install of his belly button lint. Sorry, I should have given an onphophobia trigger warning there. That's the fear of belly buttons, apparently. We can now clip on his skeleton arms and legs and see how he's shaping up. And that is really quite disturbing. His hips worked out well though, so he's able to sit up in the car seat. Then Kristen came out to test his dance skills. I think his face stuck to something.
Oh, come here.
Oh.
Come here. Come here.
I'll fold his hands together.
Oh.
They just need some
Very
skin
cuddly. Good boy. Oh. Juicy. I had no idea.
His bones are now complete. Tubesy, a sexy fiberglass beast. So now we need some kind of test rig. We don't need an entire vehicle for the experiment, so I've just pulled out the driver's seat of my car because it turns out it still works without it anyway. I thought while I'm at it, I might try and retrieve that French fry that I dropped 5 years ago. Also, I grabbed out the seatbelt, which we might be able to use as well. While I was doing this, Kristen started to add flesh and clothing to Tubesy. The human movement limitations is working out really well, but he's only 20% downloaded so far. Now, to serve as the vehicle to transport all of this to Crash Town, I'm going to use this video production pipe dolly I made years ago. The wood board is pretty buggered, but the frame and skateboard wheels are still rock solid. So this thing self-aligns and will run smooth and straight down a set of pipes, like I'm demonstrating here with imaginary pipes. But a bit more like I'm demonstrating here with these PVC steel tubes. We can now get our car seat firmly mounted on top. And this seemingly simple task was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be, because not one of the holes on the seat frame is level with the others. Really, why can't the floor of the car just be flat? It's like car engineers never played with Lego as kids. To overcome this, I'll use a trick that some builders use in the housing industry nowadays. I'm just going to use a stack of wood scraps, which I can hide later with cladding. I've then chucked a few tech screws in there, and the seat was all kind of firmly attached. So the platform already has a handle attached to it, which we might be able to use to propel the rig for the crash test. With the handle folded back, it actually looks like it's designed for you to push yourself around on, which of course isn't something someone would actually think would work or be stupid enough to try. Now we just need a steering wheel for our rig. I managed to pick one up online for $20, which also includes its original airbag, which is perfect for our experiment because we can test our airbag against the real deal. I thought I'd remove it and get some wires on there before I mount it. So the driver's side airbag is part of the horn assembly. You can actually see it concertina folded in there. So on the back of the horn assembly, you can see the gas generator that fills the bag. I've rigged some wiring into the connector, which actually needed a bit of dodgy wizardry. But on that note, don't actually mess around with airbags. Handling them incorrectly, they can be really dangerous. Just watching this video could have set the airbags off in your car in the driveway right now. We now need to get this steering wheel mounted in an appropriate position. It would be good to just weld it in place, but it's the wrong type of metal, and it will also explode violently, which can sometimes affect the quality of the weld. So I need to get the position of the steering wheel right for the test because it won't be adjustable after. However, the seat might still be adjustable though. Then, with a bit of scrap steel, I made up a mounting base and a post to hold the steering wheel. I was kind of guessing the right angle, but I knew it was somewhere between Volkswagen Combi angle and playground steering wheel. After a little bit of welding, then just a few bolts into the flimsy bracket later, we had ourselves a sim racing rig for the PlayStation. That placement feels about right. Only problem is it loses some fun points because the steering wheel can't be turned, which is actually how the steering wheels are on trains, I'm guessing. Then we just need to add a few bolts going through the floor of our car to make it all secure, and that feels pretty steady based on YouTube building codes. We can now move on to the tracks, but I need something a bit longer than these PVC ones. Luckily, steel tube grows like a weed in my garden, and I have these two mature stalks that have just reached harvesting length. Just for now, I've laid them out to see how the crash rig rolls down them. That runs beautifully smooth. To be honest, now I want to build some kind of garden roller coaster. Or maybe a sim rig that simulates acceleration and braking and dumps you in the pool if you crash out. But before I go further with the tracks, I have a problem, and that is working out something that is immovable that I can crash this into. I can't use the walls of the shed because this thing will probably smash straight through, and I feel like the neighbours aren't going to appreciate looking up to see a failed airbag and mannequin on fire crashing through their fence into their kids' swing set. I thought about bolting it to the floor, but I'm not sure a couple of bolts will be strong enough. So my current plan is to try and use the edge of the concrete slab of my shed, but then just have the middle of the tracks hooking onto it, then welding an end stop on there. So I've welded up these thick bits of plate and angle to hook onto the step. But hey, no judging my welds. The welder has not been the same since doing my carbon arc search lamp video. Not sure if it was from the power of the light itself or for taking the welder for a rough walk through the bush. But that seems to be pretty strong with the load spread out across the width of the step and should work perfectly unless it doesn't. I've then welded up some end stops on the tracks and bolted a piece of timber between the two rails. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but that looks like a proper legitimate train track end thingy that I don't know the name of. Let's go with Tracky Banger. We can just update the Wikipedia page on trains later. Knocking our crash rig into that seems nice and questionable. But if it does crash through, I do have this flimsy shelving and my collection of air, which should arrest the impact. So now the tricky part. The thing with trying to make an airbag system is you need a method to detect the crash. Modern cars use a bunch of different accelerometers like you'd find in your phone. These detect the impact, then have a chat with the computer about it, and if they all agree that the crash is actually happening and it's not just a big pothole or something in the road, they set the airbag off. That all seems really difficult, but inspired by the original invention of the airbags, I like the idea of just an inertial weight going forward and acting as a switch, because I'm curious if something like that would even be quick enough to activate an airbag. I'd like to make the one from the patent specifically, but I just don't have the machining tools for that. But as far as a weight trigger goes, I remember I had something that I bought years ago that might actually do the trick. So this thing is an inertial fuel pump cutoff switch, which I usually bought for old cars that have been converted to an electric fuel pump to shut the pump off after a crash. There's a chance it might actually be fast enough to set the airbag off in time. I took it apart to show you how it works, which went amazingly. And I've broken the shit out of it. Damn it. So how these work, inside there's a steel ball held in place by a magnet. When there is an impact exceeding a certain amount of force, the ball flies forward and is rammed upwards into a metal trapdoor which pops open, switching off power to the fuel pump. So the bastard thing with this shitty little spring would not hold in place when I tried to reassemble it. No way. After an hour or so, I ended up having to drill holes in it and make temporary hinges out of pins to hold it in place while I put the spring on top. So that's an interesting little hack that one of you might need one day, but you'll never be able to find this clip again. I think we got it. Now when activated, these things are for switching something off rather than something on, but luckily they actually include a third terminal in there which I'm hoping does the opposite. To test it, I've hooked it up to 12 volts and an LED light. Then if we bang it hard enough, the light should turn on. Perfect. Just to double check, I hooked it up to a multimeter and discovered that when the switch is reset, there is still a little bit of voltage in there, which is probably enough to randomly set off the airbag, which is something we don't want, and why the f is everything so difficult in this video? In the end, I realized it was because it's hooked up to a battery charger, but once I put it on a 12 volt battery, it was all good. Now we can get all of this electrical junk mounted on our crash rig. I secured the 12 volt battery in what I'm calling the battery coffin. Then as a professional touch, I'm holding it down securely with 2 wood screws and a piece of aluminium window frame. I'm then going to put in a main safety switch. Then just as a little backup, so the airbags don't go off accidentally, I put a second safety switch in so nothing can be activated unless the rig is near the end of the track. And we're just going to screw our inertial switch onto the side here. Plus I'm going to put an LED light on here so we can see if the switch has been activated and hopefully be able to see how much delay there is until the airbag goes poof. I then put some staples and nails in the wires to hold them secure so we don't get any damage in the crash by anything sharp or metallic. As one finishing touch, I've noticed looking at a lot of crash test footage that they normally have some kind of flash or indicator light showing the exact moment that the car makes contact with the object. So I'm going to do this too, not only so we can see how much time it takes for the airbag to inflate, but also because it looks cool, like we're doing some sort of proper crash test sciencey stuff and we know what we're doing. Which we do, because I have this old 1980s flash on hand, which I've wired to this limit switch, and then just bent it into the perfect position. And that seems to work perfect. It's almost too quick to see, but if we have a look at it with a high-speed shot, that timing's right on. So for moving this thing down the tracks, I don't want to be in the explodey zone pushing it, or in front of it. So I'm going to tow it with a rope through a sailing pulley off to the side, just like I did my concrete fidget spinner video from back in 2017, because you didn't even want to be in the same postcode as that thing. However, it looks like my good ratchet pulley here is buggered though. I got this thing for about $90 back in 2001. I thought I'd just buy a replacement, and now this thing is over $300. I literally bought an entire yacht for that amount once. So I ended up just rebuilding it instead. After I got all the little spider egg sacs reinserted, it was back in action. Then just need to tie some rope on the front here. For the pulley, the obvious strong tie down point for this is the leg of my 3 meter tall shelving unit, because there's a huge amount of weight on here holding it in place. And if it did actually break, it has another 3 legs backing it up. With the rope running through the pulley nice and smoothly, we can give it a casual test run. And that's running really good. It's not massively fast, but it has a good rigid sudden stop, which is what we want. Now I think we're ready to test out if our triggering mechanism and camera flash actually work. For now, I've just hooked up an LED light in place of the airbag. I've rolled it back into position, and we can give it a pull. And that looks like it's done the trick. You can see the camera flash go off when it contacts the end of the track. And then the LED is turned on from the impact switch, so some voltage is going to the airbag. But it's hard to see how much delay there is, so I think we need more cameras and some slow motion shots. So I've recruited Kristen for rope pulling duties while I activate the slow motion camera. And that has completely worked, it seems, but is way f***ing noisier than I thought it would be. The crash rig is getting some nice air there on impact. To be honest, I thought this experiment would be dead in the water because I thought the inertial switch would be too slow. But this is shot at 500 frames per second, and between the camera flash going off and the LED light activating is 5 frames, which works out to about 10 milliseconds, which is about 8/12 of a rabbit's dash in the Imperial system. From what I've read, that isn't too far behind the computer-based detection in modern cars, which is apparently around 5 milliseconds. So that might actually be quick enough to catch our crash test dummy. I reckon we are now ready to get Tubesy into the driver's seat and do a crash test without the airbag to see how he behaves. Now the only thing he was missing is a butt worthy of sitting on to keep him upright in the driver's seat. So I've glued some layers of special purpose gluteus foam on his plywood pelvis. Then just to give him a bit of shape, I've carved him a coin slot with a kitchen knife. Still, probably not the weirdest visual I've created on this channel, but it must be up there. We can then put him in the driver's seat. It's actually very similar to trying to weave a toddler into a car baby seat. So he can hold the steering wheel, I've just made up a wire glove hand. I should have done something better, but you all know how my last casting experience went. But he's comfy in the seat, so let's give it a try. However, just before that, perhaps click on the old subscribe button there if you haven't. But I'm hoping to make more videos like this, and getting that sub number up will definitely help make that happen. Well, I've got to admit, that was pretty fun. Everything is triggered nicely, and Tubesy's taken a fair whack there. His arms and legs are all behaving great, but I'm really not happy with his lack of torso flexibility. I mean, it's great posture for a car crash victim, but it's not exactly what we want. I think his hips are jamming up, then because he's so light, it's launching him upwards, so his head's not going into the steering wheel how I would have liked. So I've freed up his hips a bit to stop the material snagging in there. Then, once again, Kristen did the old driveway run, so we could give him another go. Still, again, everything is triggering great, but he's not folding up enough. His chest is hitting the steering wheel pretty hard though. Before wasting an airbag on him, I ended up dissecting him and extending his hip hinges to see if it would help. We gave him another test to see if we could get a bit more of a ragdoll out of him. But still the same thing again, the seat is just launching him up through the windscreen. Looking at the slow-mo though, it's crazy how much everything flexes around that you don't notice in real time. But with his pelvis, in the slow-mo you can really see the issue here. He's just not getting his hips into it properly, which isn't good for anyone involved. So I thought the test would be more interesting without a seatbelt, but we might need just a lap sash just to hold his butt down in the seat. We could use a proper seatbelt, but the other common legal way to be restrained in a car in Australia is to have a lumbar punch into your tailbone with a 30mm chipboard screw and a bracket, where a rope can then be tethered to the car seat. It's basically how we all grew up in Australia before 3-point seatbelts were introduced. Okay, now I may have achieved the weirdest visual on my channel. It was really unfortunate timing that I had to be doing this when an electrician was on my neighbour's roof. I also ended up raising the height of the steering wheel, which seemed a bit too low. But we are now good to give it another test. It has blown his hair off, but he's behaving a lot more like a bag of human meat now. Hair off and hood on. Smooth work, Tubesy. The rope was a bit too loose, so I tightened it up a bit just to see if we can get his head to contact the steering wheel. And we're almost there, but I had to bite the bullet and give him a lap sash seatbelt. And that is looking a lot more brutal. That is probably as good as we can expect out of someone with a fiberglass torso and acrylic nipples. But I tell you what, Tubesy has some sick dance moves. We are now finally ready to test this with a proper airbag to see if our dodgy switching setup is quick enough to activate in time to save Tubesy's face from smacking into the steering wheel and having a lifelong Subaru logo embossed on his cheek. I have rolled the rig outside, carefully switched everything on, and we are ready to go. And boom! It's a bit too quick to tell, but it looked like it caught him in time. And then I had a brief panic that there might be a little fire in there somewhere. I knew it'd be smoky from the inflation reaction, but it seemed to just keep smouldering. Once I was completely 5% confident that there was no fire, I was keen to check out the slow motion shots. And that trigger has surprisingly done it. It's actually deployed the airbag in time. His head didn't hit the bag like I was hoping for because Tubesy's just too rigid still. But the airbag had no issues holding him back by his chest. Then he gracefully slid down onto a comfortable pillow. It's also reassuring to see that this almost 20-year-old airbag worked still. Also interesting to see in the slow motion shots that my dodgy wire setup disconnected from the airbag instantly, but it was still enough current to get the reaction started, which I imagine is what you'd want in a crash if the power is damaged. So looking at the high-speed footage frame by frame, surprisingly the time between the camera flash signalling the impact and the airbag fully inflating, it's about 30 milliseconds, which is about in the range of how long it takes for a modern car to deploy a driver's side airbag. You know, it just lacks the other features of modern airbag systems, like being able to tell the difference between an actual crash or a pothole, or just snatch strapping people who can't park properly out the way. But the airbag is wildly fast. It looks like it's deployed before his seatbelt's even taken the strain, so that's going to be hard to compete with, but we're going to have a crack. After the bag and horn had cooled off, I removed it to see what secrets it would like to tell me. The first thing you notice is how the horn plastic is designed to perfectly burst open, like a demogorgon's about to eat your face. But the other thing I couldn't help but notice is that the plug is completely melted. I don't know if that's normal, like maybe it's engineered that way to prevent a used bag being put back into a car, but I imagine it would melt the plug on the car end as well. So I'm curious if anyone in the comments has any ideas on that. Also interesting to see, the bag is a bit thicker and stronger than I imagined, so they must have a pretty good way of folding it up to fit it in there, but I'm guessing it's also fairly heat-proof. But then if we remove this part, this is the actual airbag gas generator. A lot of the time they describe airbags as something that explodes, but really, provided that everything works okay, it's more like a rapid rocket motor. So how these work, inside there is an igniter in the middle. Once the voltage hits this, it ignites a solid propellant donut around the outside. But this is where things get interesting. To prevent all that delicious donut ingredients from being blown directly into your face at 300 kilometers per hour, they have a packet of 2-minute steel noodles around the edge. This helps filter any particles and take some of the heat out before the gases escape through these holes and fill the bag. It's a really clever life-saving device, unless you have an airbag that's on the Takata recall list, which may see your airbag basically fail and chuck all of this shit in your face. As a tip, if you have a car that's made between 2000 and 2015, it's probably a good idea to go online and check if it's one of the models that's been affected, and the dealers replace the bags for you. So for our DIY airbag, making the bag itself should be easy enough. Looking at this one, it's mostly comprised of a bag. Then with air added to it, it becomes an airbag. With the light added to it, it becomes a light airbag, which might actually make a good film soft light. For the gas generator, I'm going to try and use compressed air like the original patent, except with a valve that's opened electrically instead of mechanically like in the old one. Now, if you've seen my other videos, you know I've messed around with this stuff before, like in my cat repellent video and my wildlife rescue net launcher. In those videos, I used a common but slightly modified sprinkler valve, which can be triggered electrically. Then if we have a tank with enough air in it, it should hopefully fill the bag. The tank on the net launcher, I'm guessing is going to be too small, but I still have Thomas the accumulator tank sitting on my shelf. We just need to get him cleaned up. I'm going to put the pressure gauge back in there and grab the valve. Then we need to work out a place to mount it. Straight away you can see the limitations of using compressed air like in the original patent. The tank and the plumbing is all going to take up so much room. I believe the original was mounted in the dashboard in the engine bay. Another problem, if you mount the tank in the wrong place, it could get ruptured in the crash, which you probably don't want. But I've welded up some tabs onto the tank to hold it in place, and tech screwed it onto the steering post. Then I've got together all my random bits of PVC, which will take the air up around the bend into a bigger chamber where our airbag will be living. For the bag itself, I'm just going to try and use a pillowcase because it needs the least sewing, and I think I've broken the sewing machine by trying to fix my wetsuit. With the bag sealed, I've cut a hole that will go over the end of our PVC tube. Then I've worked out this fairly sketchy coupling that clamps the bag in place. With the bag opening jammed in there, I've then put some short screws in to stop it from simply firing a scrunched up bag in your face. Then we can load the airbag into our canister. I'm guessing the factory uses some kind of slightly more advanced folding technique, but I was lucky to even fit this in. Then we just need a covering to keep our bag safely packed. It turns out an olive jar lid is the exact right size to fit over a 50mm PVC tube. So for all the Greeks out there, this also means that your DIY airbag could easily accommodate a jar of Kalamata olives, which could make for a great mid-accident high-speed snack. Then the final finishing touch, the old SRS logo, which stands for Supplemental Restraint System, which really is quite a fitting description for the lid of any jar preventing you from getting to snacks. Then just a bit of glue to prevent this from simply firing into the roof of the shed. And there we go. You can barely tell the difference between this and a proper airbag system. We can then get some air in there and give this a test. I filled it to somewhere between 80 and 90 psi. Yes, this is the only time I'll use the Imperial system. The valve is simply 2 wires and connected straight to our existing trigger setup, and we are ready to go. And that was remarkably shit. If that was a real crash, Tubesy would be dead. The impact speed's not even that fast, but still wasn't quick enough to deploy to catch him in time. I thought the bag deployment would be the easy bit and the trigger mechanism would be the hard bit. But that's just so slow. And keep in mind, I've done a fair few modifications to this valve to make it open even quicker. But the delay just seems to be one of the downsides of these diaphragm valves. Once the valve opens, the initial pulse is quite quick. And that's all I've needed to deploy stuff in the past. But to fill the bag, this setup also needs that sustained flow. A bit like when you first break the seal during a night on the Terps. After it pops open, you can hear the horn sound, which I think is the valve's diaphragm flapping in the breeze, which you can also see flapping the bag. So it's basically just a big car crash whoopee cushion. The other obvious issue here is the cotton bag is just too porous, and it's probably leaking a lot of the air anyway. Just out of curiosity, I did a couple of static tests to get a few more slow motion shots so we could see what's going on. Ignoring the delay of the valve, it's interesting watching a side-by-side with the proper airbag. It jumps out fairly quick, but by the time it's even thinking about inflating, the proper car airbag is already done for the day and gone home for a beer. On the plus side though, if you were looking for a device to throw an olive jar lid at your throat at high speed, then this is probably a great solution. Definitely something to get on board with if you want to try a do-it-yourself backyard tracheostomy. Okay, I have another, hopefully simple option which we may be able to use. Fuel combustion to generate the inflation. Kind of like how a car engine works and pushes a cylinder in the car, but we will push and hopefully inflate a DIY car airbag instead. I thought about trying to use propane, like this or this one, but maybe just starter fluid, which contains ether and a few other ingredients that allow it to not be too fussy about igniting. It seems to work well for filling tyres if you don't like having hair on your arms. If we use our existing PVC setup, then cap it off with an ignition linked to our airbag switch, maybe this will actually be quick enough to get us into that 30 millisecond range of modern car airbags. I've replaced the bag with a sealed one that shouldn't leak. We've readied up the test rig and given it a go. And Tubesy's dead. The ignition didn't work for some reason, so I gave it another go. And some reason, it just won't work. Tubesy is just getting his face smashed. In the end, I just thought I'd use the blowtorch trick from my gas rocket video to manually light it for a stationary test. Just to see if we're even in the ballpark. It looked fast, but there's less inflation than the compressed air test. Looking at the slow-mo, well, I'm impressed a plastic rubbish bag contained a fireball as well as it did. But overlaying and comparing the speed, yeah, we are way off the pace. However, I reckon we did succeed at replicating what Ronald McDonald's scrote must look like. At this stage, I think it's safe to say that attempting to use a DIY airbag system in your car would be a wildly bad idea, and you probably shouldn't attempt anything like this. However, I feel like this topic is something I might need to revisit sometime. Let me know your ideas in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe. If you didn't, feel free to subscribe anyway so you can hate watch my next video. Their channel is Turner81, and I'll catch you next time.